I'm Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day and publisher of Gestalt IT, and we are here in Boston for Cloud Field Day. I'm catching up with my friend Eric Wright, and as often happens when I talk to Eric, the conversation turns to service mesh. So, Eric, tell me more. What is a service mesh?
One of the most confused things. Service mesh is generally going to be found in cloud or cloud native environments, especially containerized Kubernetes. Really the idea is about applications speaking to applications so that each thing is addressable, but not in the old school way of IPv4, because we always worry that we're going to run out of IPv4 addresses. So we tried to attend to that in two different ways. One was using IPv6, super cool, uniquely addressable, really hard to understand. The other is a service mesh where effectively they're very dynamic networks, app to app, never necessarily externally facing, but you can put load balancers and neat stuff in front of it. But it really is for dynamic network environments to get service to service communication.
And is this related in any way to like sort of this whole zero trust architecture kind of concept?
There is, because usually service mesh was a way that by default was API driven and can be automated. And in doing so, you can connect it to other ways of authenticating and authorizing, which is really where that zero trust piece comes in, of using some automated tool that requests is provision something based on a certificate or based on some kind of a signer, and then that signer is given access to the mesh, and then communication begins. And then as they drop off the network, then of course you can get inter application SSL as well. Everything should be mutual TLS. That's really the goal, is that you can get MTLS across the board. Super complex though. That's like one of the biggest problems. People are like, hey, you need a service mesh. And right after that, it's the famous Jamie Zawinski quote. He says, I had a problem, and so I used regex to solve the problem. Now I have two problems. The service mesh effectively does the same thing, that I've got a networking problem, so I'm putting in a service mesh. Now I have a service mesh problem and a networking problem.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, I think, is that what I hear from people is a lot of moaning and groaning that service mesh is incredibly complicated, incredibly difficult to implement, incredibly difficult to actually adapt to and use. Is this true, or is this more basically you just don't have enough skills or enough resources to do it?
It's kind of like anything. If you say we want to be cloud native, the first thing you do is think, well, how do I immediately take everything I own and make it act this way? So we get stuck in this kind of the bigness of it all, the boiling the ocean problem. So people will go to put in service mesh, realizing they really only need it for a handful of their potentially hundreds or thousands of applications, but they get stuck in like, am I going to architect it for scale? They have difficulty with service, and the mutual TLS is one of the biggest problems. And then beyond there, you have to include the security people, the networking people, the application development team, the operations team. So it is a team mesh that really highlights how much these people don't talk.
Yeah.
Or understand each other in what they do.
And that seems to me to be the sort of the core thing about service mesh. Service mesh is a practice that you have to really adopt, you have to embrace it, and you have to really organize your whole development around this as sort of the right way, the way that we're going to do it. And then you have to be militant about making sure that this is really our guiding light. And if you don't do that, then basically, are you going to be able to get any value out of these tools, or is it just sort of, this has to be rule or goal number one,
right,
or don't do it?
Yeah, I think what is the reason that you need to do a service mesh is the primary one, and invariably it should be a security driver. That's almost always it. It's a networking tool that is actually a security tool. So it's almost always about making sure you have secure inter-service and inter-application communication that may bridge across public networks. And that's where the fun begins, of going between disparate networks, between multi-cloud networks, going hybrid on-prem. But that's the thing, like you said, why are we doing this? And you get, what's the driver? Is it automation, speeding the applications, being dynamic? Is it about full automation of security and secrets? Is it purely just one application needs to speak to another and it has to go across an insecure network? So this is one way to do it. Many, many reasons, but it's a complex thing. I mean, even VMware had two types of distributed switches. There's a standard and a VDS, or virtual distributed switch. And it was supposed to be, everybody's like, why wouldn't you use VDS? It's amazing. But 90+% of the environments didn't use it because there wasn't actually a need to go to that extra layer of complexity. And so that meant that we did things the old way for so long that it became difficult to imagine doing them a new way. I think service mesh is kind of there. It's like, we understand how it should work, but we have not done things that way ever before. If you're cloud native, born in the cloud, born in Kubernetes, it seems completely natural. But for most folks, it's a very new way to do things. And even like secret management, same thing. It's like, if you're not automating secret management, you're not really getting the value out of it. It's basically a giant keyword store or key pass store for you, but it's the automation that's kind of that thing that makes it the most amazing part.
And I will just say, sort of from my editorial perspective, I feel like all of these tools are absolutely better, absolutely a massive advancement. And if you can use them, can be extremely, extremely valuable. I mean, you bring up secrets management, oh my gosh, such a valuable tool. But you have to use them, and that's the problem, I think, with so many things in IT, is that we only halfway embrace them, and that's right. As good as not embracing them at all. And like you said, it causes more problems than it's worth.
Yeah, and I think once you get it, there's this weird aha moment that once you realize you do like an automated, request for a secret is generated, it's given to an application on the other side, and then it generates a mutual TLS key to communicate between the two, and you're like, how have we never done this before? Easy. 37 years of not being able to do it have caused us to find other really gnarly workarounds.
Yeah.
And we as humans in operations have an incredibly high pain tolerance. And that is why automation is amazing when we figure it out, but we are way too willing to hang on to how we did it up till now far too long.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, look at IT. There's so many instances of people holding on to things for far too long. Well, thank you so much for this quick conversation. Follow Eric, read what you're laying down. A lot more to this conversation to come. Thanks for joining us.